That said, we are talking about Guinan and Picard, and specifically why Guinan didn't recognize Picard in 10 Forward, the bar she conveniently owns 400 years before 10 Forward existed. But that's a whole other story for another day. Because we are talking about that, a lot of people are suspicious as to why she doesn't recognize Picard, yet the guy on the bus maybe remembers something with the neck punch or whatever. And we are going to explain to you why she doesn't recognize Picard, why she shouldn't recognize Picard, and why it's probably pretty good time travel logic on Terry Matalas' part. Right, Shane? But before we do, if you are not a subscriber, go ahead and go down there and hit that subscribe button and the like button and all that stuff on your way to the comment section to yell at us on how we're wrong. Shane?
Yes.
Talk to me, Goose.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it whether or not it's good time travel, but I will say it's acceptable reasoning.
Okay.
I guess. But I'm not sure I'm willing to bite off on the fact that it's good time travel. It's all very complicated. And, the whole timey-wimey stuff is always difficult for people to wrap their heads around. I don't care who you are.
Right.
The fact that we have Guinan, and the reason we're going to talk about this is because we're doing a video on it. Did we talk about that? Did we mention that?
We didn't mention that, no.
Okay, so there's an actual Popcast Prime video dropping on this tomorrow. And you're definitely going to want to watch that because I think it's gonna really pull together everything and be able to give a better explanation, probably than I'm giving to you right now.
Right.
Basically, we wanted to address this because a lot of people are confused. When in the normal Starfleet timeline, or normal Star Trek timeline,
Let's call it the Federation timeline.
the Federation timeline. Yeah, because there's a lot of confusion. Like you have our current world. Like, what do you call our time? Like
Earth
reality.
Prime?
We're Prime.
I guess we'd be Earth Prime. We'd be the original timeline.
Okay, we're and a lot of people, including myself, was a little unsure. Like, hey, is Star Trek in our prime reality or not? Because there's a lot of questions about whether or not the whales actually got saved now. This question has led on to, well, what about the probe that shows up in the future, right? And saving the whales.
Yeah, and Salty Trekker brought up during our show on Saturday that it's completely possible that the whales just aren't extinct in that universe.
Right. So yeah. And
or
so
that the Confederation blew them out of the water. Like, not the whales, but the probe.
Well, and that's why it starts to become like, okay, are they in our timeline or not? Or, how things work. So basically, whatever. Star Trek Federation Prime timeline gets shifted by, we believe, the Borg Queen and her action to get power from the entire fleet in the first episode. We don't believe Q is the one who shifted the timeline. Our theory is the Borg Queen did it.
Yeah, I actually think there's something wrong with Q. I think that Q is obviously there's something wrong with Q, but my theory on what's wrong with him is that he's out of juice, and this is like he's going out to try to help. He's going out trying to help Picard one last time, sort of fix things before he's just out.
Before he's done. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So when it shifted over to the 2024 Confederation timeline, and we get Picard in his current time, totally new future, totally different reality. They go back in time of the Confederation timeline. So this is what had everybody confused. So why didn't Picard and Guinan know each other? Because in the Broken Arrow episodes of TNG, Data's head gets found in a Earth cavern in present time, and they end up going back into time in order to figure out what happened or whatever. They run into Guinan while they're there, and Guinan doesn't know Picard, but Picard knows Guinan. And throughout the entire episode,
oh, you meant Time Zero. Sorry, you meant Time Zero.
What did I say? Broken Arrow.
Broken Arrow.
I'm sorry, I got Christian Slater on the mind. I don't know why. So in Time Zero, you're right. And so, yeah, so basically they meet, they go through this entire thing, and they have this conversation at the end where Guinan isn't supposed to let Picard know that they met, or else this whole thing wouldn't have happened. Right? So she's supposed to pretend like, whatever, like she didn't meet him a long time ago. But it's obvious in this episode of Picard that she really doesn't know who he is.
Right.
So it's painfully obvious that that event never happened. Well, at first I was a little bit like, I didn't quite get it either, because I'm like, oh, wait a sec. The event that's supposed to change history doesn't take place for 3 days. So technically, she should still know him, and then in 3 days, it'll blip out. But then I remembered, oh, wait. If you're using Back to the Future time travel,
Right.
then that's not how it works. And because we don't really know how time travel works, because guess what, guys? There's no freaking thing such as time travel.
Right. And Star Trek has been all over the place across multiple shows on how it works with them. In fact, the whole Kelvin alternate timeline is really sort of what started the confusion, because if the Kelvin universe had really worked out, they would have just been making Star Trek in the Kelvin universe. But because of the cowardice, in my opinion, of the studio to just go with their new reboot, they sort of explain like this branch reality with the Kelvin universe, the Kelvin universe, and that made all of the Star Trek time travel in Star Trek sus, including the Voyager stuff with 7 and 9, the final episode. Like, for a long time, it was basically you have a singular timeline, and what you do in that timeline is affecting the timeline going forward, like in the Hell's Year and all that with Voyager. But when the Kelvin thing was introduced, they made the audience believe that that's a branch timeline and our regular timeline is continuing, which completely negates, or at least confuses, other Star Trek shows and how they dealt with time travel, like in TOS and The Guardian Forever. So,
well, you got to remember this, yeah. But you got to remember, one's the movies and one's TV, and at the time they were two different entities.
Right, and they should have kept it that way. But in Discovery, they actually explained the Kelvin universe in Discovery, which was so weird and meta.
Yeah, they shouldn't have done that.
Right.
You know, they shouldn't know anything about Kelvin. None of that stuff should exist.
They shouldn't know anything about it.
You know, because I do like that they kept. I wanted us, you know, when you're doing a TV show, I didn't want an alternate reality TV show. I'm glad we stayed, as many problems as there are in a lot of the new Trek stuff. I'm still glad we're in, you know, we're operating in the proper time zone or time frame, because if we weren't, then I would be totally confused about everything, and I would just be irritated and probably would just quit.
Right.
You know, because I need an anchor point.
The Kelvin timeline.
I do. And so when we're watching Picard, I needed that anchor point as well. And when Guinan didn't know Picard, I'm like, oh, I don't like this. But then, as thinking of the Back to the Future rules, I was like, okay, when Biff changes the past and they go into, you know, the future and Biff Towers and all that stuff in Back to the Future too, you realize
I'm on the bridge of my new
that they
flagship,
are now in that time.
cheering on my fleet
So
as
when
it
you
takes
go
out your
back,
starbase.
then I guess the events that happened inside of that time
About to
would not
launch
have happened.
right behind you.
So that makes sense to me. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to change these events in 3 days. And when they change those events in 3 days, Guinan will once again know who Picard is. Because the future of the Federation will correct. Yeah, right? So in 3 days, Guinan will remember Picard from the 1800s. Because they will have corrected the timeline.
So what we're dealing with is we are dealing with a singular timeline, for sure.
Yeah.
And the timeline being corrupted, because I had to come up with the word corrupt timeline, because when I said alternate timeline on Saturday, I was constantly reminded that they said this is not an alternate timeline. But I think that's semantics, because it's the corrupt version of the prime timeline. So yes, not an alternate timeline, but a corrupted version of the main timeline.
I think that's a better explanation.
Which means that because they went back in time in the corrupted version of the timeline, and the fact that time is, and the changes in time affects everything, right? She didn't recognize him. But in 3 days, if they correct that event that corrupted the timeline in the first place, cutting the rot out at the root before it can corrupt the timeline, then yes, her memories of Picard should come flooding back.
Right, just like the siblings for Michael J. Fox were deleting off the photo. They reappeared once the timeline was fixed.
Right. Now, the reason Back to the Future made it so that they were slowly being deleted and Michael J. Fox was slowly being was fading out was because if
for drama.
it was for drama, guys.
Yeah, yeah.
The whole reason is if it happened instantaneously, the way it probably should happen if time travel were real, then there'd be no movie.
Well, and you got to look at the current movie that's out on Netflix, the one with the Ryan Reynolds.
Oh, yeah. What is that called?
Adam Project.
Adam Project, yeah.
So in that one, the time happens, right? The change happens in that one, but the kid and the current, young Reynolds and old Reynolds are still there with the dad well after the event occurs. Mm-hmm. And it takes time for them to disappear. And I think they tried to explain that, but I'm like, they did that so they could have the ending the way they wanted it to end.
Right.
That's probably not how it would really have happened.
The way Doctor Who explains it is in other places, but like, it's like ripples, and it takes time for the ripples to catch up with all the time. Like, yeah,
Okay.
that's sure. Or we're making a TV show or a movie, and it has to be that way for you to have dramatic moments,
Right. And that's more like it. And because, look, I mean, maybe time travel exists. I don't know. Depending on
maybe
what
it does. Maybe there's a
Maybe it
version of the timeline where you and I are actually fairly famous YouTubers. But someone went back in time and made it so that we were prone to gaining weight, and we never made it. We never made it when we wanted to make it. Now we're 45 and finally trying to make it work.
But that's not time travel. That's alternate universe. See, this is what I hate about this whole thing. This is what I don't like about it. See, the multiverses theory that's become really popular of late has taken over the whole idea of, and Marvel's the one to blame for this garbage. So, it made sense with Back to the Future. It was the same timeline, and things changed within that timeline. But the moment you start having these branch off events, which, by the way, is kind of the way scientists explain it is that's kind of how things work. Every choice you make creates every decision you make. There's a different timeline with each of those possibilities you could have chosen.
Yeah, that's the Rick and Morty explainer. There's an infinite amount of realities because every single choice, a binary choice creates another version of a reality where you could have made the opposite choice.
Right, and even if that's true, I hate it.
I hate it so much.
Because it's too much. It's too big. It's too complicated. There's too many variables, too many options, and it's bad for storytelling.
Right.
Okay, so if it is true, it's bad for movies, and they should stop doing it right away.
Right.
Because you got all these things out there, and Marvel is really super guilty of it, and in my opinion, was one of the things that kind of ruined, even though Endgame was a really great ending with Captain Marvel there, but I did not like the multiple, variations of time, and, would you have old Captain? No. Anyways. I can't remember exactly what happened, but all I know is I didn't like the way it ended, and somebody went back through time and replaced all the stones into the proper places, and you're like, okay, this is bad. I don't like it.
Yeah.
So Star Trek at least is staying inside the same timeline as far as we're aware.
Yeah. So look at this. I was trying to pull this up while you were talking so she explains it, right?
Oh yeah. I hate this.
She goes, "Here's the sacred timeline," right?
Yeah.
I love how they call it the sacred timeline.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah,
yeah, it's fine. And him removing the stone at that moment is creating a branch timeline. Now, she's going to end up giving it to him anyways because of something he says. But the fact that he says something about Doctor Strange and she's like, oh, wait, he wants it? Oh, here you go. Mm-hmm. There's so many problems with this because her giving that to him doesn't mean that he's now traveling to his sacred timeline. That means he's traveling to yet another branch timeline, which would infer that there's a sacred timeline out there where Thanos still won. So this whole thing is stupid. They should have just done one timeline and been done with it. They even say in the movie about the Back to the Future thing.
They did it, and I'll tell you why they did it. I think they did it because they wanted to be able to create more content in the future of whatever they wanted to do.
Right.
And there's nothing that pisses fans off more than, the people making up stories and making up, there has to be a concrete truth to things. Everything cannot be true. That's the problem we have in our society today. multiverse time travel is the same thing as what's happening in our social media society today.
Yes.
Everything is not true.
Yeah, the opposite. There's a difference between true and truth.
Right.
And the problem is people keep saying, oh, well, that's my truth. Well, that's incorrect. There is the truth, which is a binary, sacred thing that cannot be changed. Now, you can look at the reflection of said truth and say, that's what's true to me. Fine. But you have to acknowledge that you are seeing it from a direction or from a perspective that is different than other people's direction and or perspective. You are seeing a shadow or a reflection of the actual truth. Not acknowledging that puts you in these echo chambers that just further dent the destruction of our society and brings us closer to the Discovery timeline.
Yeah, no, I think you said it perfectly. You have to, you can say it is your opinion or it is what you believe, but just because you believe it doesn't mean it is true for everyone. And that's the same thing that's happening in these timelines. When you splinter off all these timelines, there's too many possibilities and it creates confusion. Right. So in Star Trek, that's kind of what people felt like. Wait a sec, we're messing up this Guinan thing. We're messing it up. But if you think about it, and if you believe in the Back to the Future time travel, which is my favorite, I think it's linear. I like it. I feel like this is the same, and I think things will snap back after this 3 days is done, and it will change. It will change things back.
Yeah, there is a moment in Back to the Future, by the way, where Doc tries to explain like branch timelines. And there is a gigantic amount of people out there that completely ignore that scene and think it should be removed from the system because it messes with the entire theory.
It does. Let's just look at, maybe it is true. Maybe, what is it, string theory? I can't remember what this is.
It's part of string theory is like multi-branch realities and all that.
Yeah,
Rick and Morty does it best, actually. A cartoon does the best version of this, and they make fun of it because of how absurd it is.
Well, and it is absurd. And even, So basically, I think we should be okay with what they're doing here in Picard, even if you're not loving all of the heavy-handed political stuff that they're pinning to us. If they lighten up on that as we go forward, focus on the story, we'll probably be okay. If Guinan remembers Picard after 3 days, then I think, and after they fix everything, if she turns into the Guinan we know, and this is my problem with this Guinan right now, is that I feel like they're really focusing on her anger and frustration and going on, and Guinan's character has always been kind of like Yoda or
Zen.
Yeah, she's always at peace.
Yeah. She looks for solutions. She doesn't focus on problems.
Yeah, and we have seen her frustrated a couple times in TNG over Picard's decision against the Borg. That was one of the few times we saw her actually riled up.
Right.
So we know that it's possible for the character to get this way, but I think with a new Guinan, you're gonna have to get a feel of the old Guinan in order to make her believable. Right now, maybe it's a good casting. It's a younger version, and she has the right look or whatever. But I'm not going to believe it's Guinan until she starts acting like Guinan,
Right. Which maybe we'll see. Or maybe we won't even see this actress again. Maybe we'll see the future version of Guinan at some point.
It's possible. Yeah, she may be done.
Yeah, which is fine if that's the case.
I have a feeling we'll see her one more time, and she'll remember Picard and correct everything for everybody.
Like I said over the last couple of reviews, there was parts of this episode I really liked, and there's parts of it I didn't like. But to be honest, I also have a little more hope for next week because, yes, I didn't like all the super heavy-handed political stuff. However, I do feel like they've checked all those possible boxes, which means they have no place to go for this week other than the story because they've checked all the boxes. Every single box you can think of, they've checked it in 2 episodes. Now they can only move forward with story.
Right. If they continue every episode dragging us into this, then you're going to start hearing some criticism from us.
Yeah.
More criticism.
Yeah. Because we love Star Trek, but we also aren't shills. We're going to be honest about our opinions every single time.
100%.
Okay. Well, that's it. Just in case you missed it the first time and you aren't subscribed, hit that button on the way down to the comment section to yell at Shane for his bad ideas.
Yeah, I love it. Wait a second.
Explain to us how the Back to the Future timeline is actually a branch reality, and they don't have time travel in Rick and Morty, and it's reality based, and Marvel is actually doing it right, or they're doing it wrong. I don't know, because you know what? Your true is not my true. I get it, But we are trying to get to the straight up, no nonsense truth and ignore the shadow of said truth that is our true.
Nice. Well said. Well said. Make sure you tune into our Popcast Prime video that breaks all of this down, and it is out now, so go check it
The
out.
link
if
will be in
you're,
the description below.